Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. Drop your city in the comments. Where are you tuning in from? The smell of smoke was still clinging to my clothes, a toxic, haunting perfume, even after 3 showers. It was barely 2 days after the fire had taken everything. The cedar-shingled roof, the antique clawfoot tub, the framed photos of a life I had spent 30 years building in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. I had lost my home, but the real fire, the one that burned away every last bit of my hope and trust, was lit in a small, sterile attorney's office. I went to my son, the only family I had left, begging for a temporary place to stay and a small bridge loan until the insurance money came in. He looked me straight in the eye, his face a perfect mask of practiced pity, and said, "I can't, Mum. My hands are tied with the new company launch." But as I was leaving the parking lot, my estranged cousin, Marcus, pulled his truck right next to my rental car, rolling down the window. His face was grim. "It's worse, Eleanor," he whispered, his voice catching. "It's not just that he won't help. He's been hiding this for years. He's the reason the house was never properly insured." I'm Eleanor Vance, 52 years old, and for the last 25 years, I've been the head librarian at the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Public Library branch downtown. People think librarians just shelve books, but my job is really about details, tracking information, and understanding narrative structure, skills that, ironically, would become my greatest weapons. My world was built on quiet routine and predictable rhythms. I loved the scent of old paper and the reliable hum of the air conditioning. I had been a single mother since my son Julian was 12, and I'd sacrificed everything to put him through the best schools. Julian, now 32, was the golden boy, a rising star in the FinTech scene in Raleigh, a city 2 hours northeast of me. He was always talking about disruptive technology and early-stage seed funding. I'd beam with pride when he called, which lately was only for a quick, "How are you, Mum?" before launching into a monologue about his latest venture. The house, a charming 1950s ranch, was my fortress and the last tangible link to Julian's father, who had passed away suddenly from a heart attack 10 years ago. It was fully paid off, a source of immense security. My husband had always handled the finances, but after he died, Julian, fresh out of business school, had insisted on taking over the logistics, specifically the homeowner's insurance and property taxes, to alleviate my stress. It sounded like a sweet gesture. That was my first mistake, trusting my son's competence over my own vigilance. The subtle red flags were easy to dismiss as a busy mother's forgetfulness. A couple of years ago, I started noticing small charges on my bank statement, 300 here, 500 there, labelled software subscription or consulting fee. I'd call Julian, and he'd assure me it was just an outdated auto-pay for a shared family account that he'd fix immediately. The property tax bill came to him electronically. He'd just send me the final amount to pay. My focus was on my late husband's modest retirement fund and my own small pension. My life was simple, but secure. The fire, they determined, was an electrical fault, a tragic accident. But when I called the insurance company, the silence on the line was deafening. "Ms. Vance," the agent finally said, "the policy on record was cancelled 3 years ago. The last payment was never processed." My legs gave out. 3 years. 3 years I'd been sending Julian a monthly check specifically for the insurance premium every single month, trusting him to forward the payment. Where did that money go? The total was close to $15,000. And now, the house, valued at $450,000 in this hot Charlotte market, was a charred shell, uninsured. Marcus, my cousin, a private investigator for a local firm and the black sheep of the family for being too nosy, was the only person who believed me. He was the one who pulled me aside, knowing the shame would make me want to hide this from the world. "He's been running a shell game, Eleanor," Marcus said, sitting across from me in a Denny's booth, the coffee growing cold. "Your checks, the ones for the insurance, he deposited them into a separate checking account he opened in your name, with him as the co-signer. He calls it the Vance family operating account in his internal ledger." I felt a dizzying wave of nausea. He stole from me? For $15,000? That's the small fry, Eli. Look at these. He slid a stack of documents across the table, a mix of official-looking bank statements and blurry, candid photographs. The bank statements showed Julian transferring money from my personal accounts, the software subscriptions, and consulting fees, but the total was staggering, nearly $90,000 over the last 4 years. The memo on the transfers was always cryptic. Vance Jones LLC Seed Capital, or Operating Expense Advance. The photographs were worse. They showed Julian not in his usual sleek suit, but laughing intimately with a woman I didn't know, a striking blonde in her late 20s, at a lavish restaurant in Raleigh. But it wasn't a clandestine affair. One photo showed them shaking hands with a much older man in a bespoke suit signing documents. That woman, Marcus explained, pointing to her, is Serafina Jones. She's not his girlfriend, she's his partner. The Vance Jones LLC he keeps transferring money to. It's their new FinTech startup. Julian wasn't just pocketing your insurance money. He was using your life savings, money you were quietly building for your retirement, as untraceable seed capital for his company, disguising it as legitimate business expenses from a family account. The betrayal wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, calculated suffocation. It wasn't the petty theft of an irresponsible child. It was the financial fraud of a sophisticated businessman who saw his mother's security as his own personal piggy bank. He wasn't just ignoring me in my moment of crisis. He was the architect of the crisis. The sleepless nights began. I would walk the halls of the hotel I was staying in, clutching my hands until my knuckles were white, muttering the names of my late husband and my son, the 2 men who were supposed to protect me, one gone, the other a ghost. My librarian's detail orientation kicked in. I hired a tough-as-nails financial forensics attorney, Ms. Anya Sharma, who specialized in white-collar family fraud. She confirmed the devastating reality. Because the house was titled in my name alone, the loss was mine. But the fraud was undeniable. Julian had systematically plundered my savings and criminally mismanaged my assets. First, file a civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty and financial fraud to recoup the stolen $90,000, plus the $15,000 in lost premiums, and request punitive damages. Second, the revenge needed to be public and strategic. Julian and Serafina were hosting a lavish launch party for Vance Jones LLC at the Duke Energy Convention Center in downtown Charlotte, just a few blocks from my library, a black-tie event covered by local tech blogs. It was their moment of triumph. It was going to be my moment of justice. I worked with Marcus to gather every piece of evidence, the cancelled insurance policy, the fraudulent bank statements, a recorded conversation where Julian vaguely admitted to the auto-pay mix-up. I had a small, private moment of doubt. Was I really doing this to my son? But then I looked at the photograph of the charred wreckage of my home, and the doubt vanished, replaced by a cold, righteous anger. He had not just burned down a house, he had burned down my future. My revenge was simple, cold, and utterly devastating to his professional pride. I would expose the fraudulent foundation of his startup, not just to the family, but to his investors. The launch party was everything Julian had promised, glittering, loud, and full of the kind of young, ambitious money he desperately wanted to impress. I stood by the entrance, a borrowed, elegant black dress hiding the fear that made my hands shake. Ms. Sharma and Marcus were positioned discreetly near the stage. Julian, looking impossibly confident in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, took the stage to a round of applause. Vance Jones LLC is not just a company, he boomed, his voice resonating through the speakers. It is built on a foundation of trust, innovation, and integrity. That was my cue. As he paused for dramatic effect, I walked calmly toward the front of the stage, catching his eye. The confident smile slipped slightly, replaced by a flicker of terror. "Julian?" I called out, my voice clear and steady, amplified by a small hidden microphone Marcus had supplied. The room instantly quieted. Before we celebrate the foundation of your company, I think your investors should know exactly what that foundation is built on. Julian stammered. Mum, what are you doing? This isn't the time. The time is now, I replied, holding up a large printout of the fraudulent bank ledger. Ladies and gentlemen, my son Julian Vance is a fraud. The initial seed capital for Vance Jones LLC was not raised through legitimate means. It was systematically stolen from his mother's retirement savings, nearly $105,000, including the money meant to keep my home insured. The gasp that swept through the room was like a physical wave. I stepped onto the stage, placing the documents on the podium, my hands no longer shaking. When my home burned down 2 days ago, he refused to help me because the insurance was cancelled. He cancelled it. He pocketed the premiums for 3 years to fund this party, this lie. Julian lunged for the papers, his composure finally breaking. You're delusional, Mum! She's sick! He screamed, his face an ugly shade of red. But Ms. Sharma was there in an instant, a flurry of legal authority. She stepped to the microphone, her voice cutting through the chaos. I am Anya Sharma, legal counsel for Ms. Vance. We have filed a criminal fraud complaint and a civil suit this afternoon, which has been served to Mr. Vance. We are in possession of irrefutable evidence, including account ledgers and recorded admissions, proving the systematic misuse and theft of funds to establish this venture. The room erupted. Investors started pulling out their phones, whispers turned to shouting, and the media at the back began snapping pictures of Julian being physically restrained by a bewildered security guard. His partner, Serafina, grabbed her purse and fled the room without a backward glance. Julian looked at me, his eyes full of a raw, wounded hatred that was worse than any fire. He was no longer my golden boy. He was just a desperate, exposed thief. The legal consequences were swift and harsh. The civil court found in my favour almost immediately, granting the full amount plus punitive damages. More importantly, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, opened a fraud inquiry into Vance Jones LLC due to the misrepresentation to investors and the clear pattern of illegal fund transfers. The startup collapsed, the media buzz was toxic, and Julian's promising career was over before it began. He faced legal and financial ruin, the kind he had inflicted on me. I used the settlement money, combined with a small loan, to purchase a charming smaller cottage in the historic Dilworth neighbourhood of Charlotte, and I am slowly rebuilding my life. I learned the hard way that sometimes the only way to save yourself from betrayal is to be the one who administers the justice. I've become an advocate for financial literacy at the library, hosting workshops. I check my bank statement every morning. I'm 52 and I'm finally in full control of my own life. My relationship with Julian is irreparable. He pleaded with me to drop the charges, claiming I was ruining his life. I told him he ruined his own life the moment he chose a ledger over his mother's well-being. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I now know that setting boundaries and protecting yourself, even from your own child, is an act of ultimate self-love. I'm no longer just the librarian. I'm a survivor. If this story hit home, hit the like button, comment one below, and share your own story of family betrayal. Subscribe for more.